Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, Surviving the Winter with the Crazy Neighbor, A Lesson in Resilience. Moving into my first apartment with my best friend was supposed to be an exciting time, full of new beginnings and opportunities. But what we found instead was an experience that tested our resilience and left us with a valuable lesson about the importance of researching potential living arrangements before signing a lease. We found the perfect 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood that was surprisingly affordable, even for 2 fresh-out-of-college graduates. The basement was listed as a separate apartment, but we weren't worried as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off. Plus, the thermostat was upstairs. However, things took a turn when our downstairs neighbor moved in. From the start, it was clear that she was not someone we wanted to mess with. She would scream at her mother, call her boyfriend for meth, and even scream at her new puppies. The noise was unbearable, and it only got worse when she started smoking. Our apartment and belongings were filled with smoke, and we could not take it anymore. We contacted the landlord, but he was not much help. He informed us that we lived in a state where an apartment could be called non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with a smoking apartment. Our lease stated that we were responsible for all utilities, meaning that we were financing her gas, water, and electric. With my 2 roommates gone on vacation, I was left alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat. My stomach was constantly cramping from all the secondhand smoke. After 3 days of being trapped in a smoky hell, I was a little insane. I made a plan to survive the winter with the crazy neighbor. I checked the forecast, borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag, and prepared to live off hot liquids. I turned off the heat and braced myself for the cold. It was a challenge, but I managed to survive the freezing temperatures. The neighbor screamed and complained, but I knew I had to tough it out. Finally, after 6 long days, she left, and I could breathe a sigh of relief. I thought it was all over, but little did I know that the worst was yet to come. A few months after the incident, the police showed up at our door asking if we had any information about the whereabouts of our former neighbor. They told us that she had been reported missing and that her boyfriend Greg was the prime suspect. My heart raced as I realized that I had been living above a potential murderer. It was a surreal experience that left me feeling scared and violated. I was thankful to have moved out and away from the danger that could have threatened my life and those of my roommates. The incident taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of researching potential living arrangements. I now know to do a thorough background check on the landlord and the potential neighbors before signing any lease. But the story doesn't end there. A few years later, I received a call from one of my former roommates. She informed me that the crazy neighbor had been found dead, and the authorities had identified Greg as the perpetrator. The news sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but think about how close we had come to danger. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and to be more mindful of the people I let into my life. I now make it a point to do a thorough background check on anyone I meet, and I encourage others to do the same. Surviving the winter with the crazy neighbor was a lesson in resilience, and I'm grateful for the experience that taught me how to protect myself and my loved ones. In my opinion, surviving the winter with the crazy neighbor is a thrilling story that kept me on the edge of my seat. The author did a great job of describing the nightmare of living with a psycho neighbor and the lengths they went to in order to survive. The addition of the dramatic ending only added to the suspense and made me realize how important it is to do a thorough background check on potential neighbors and roommates. Overall, it's a cautionary tale that serves as a reminder to always trust your instincts and take precautions to protect yourself. The next story is titled, The Neighbor Who Tried to Claim My Home and Pool as Her Own. About 3 years ago, I moved into my dream home on the beach. It was in an area where people only vacation for the summer, but I decided to live there year-round. My job allowed me to work remotely, so it was perfect. My house was one of the nicest on the Strip, located right on the beach. I worked hard to keep it looking pristine, from the well-landscaped garden to the clean and beautiful pool. It was not uncommon for people to stop and admire my home as they walked down the beach. I had a slight aversion to driving due to my anxiety disorder, so I opted to ride my bike everywhere. The weather was always pleasant, and stores and restaurants were nearby, so it made sense. But it also meant that I never had a car parked outside to signal that someone lived there. One day I had gone out for lunch with some friends and stopped by the store on the way back home. When I arrived, I noticed several cars parked outside my house and even one in the driveway. I found it strange, but with the summer season, it wasn't unusual for people to visit the beach. So I let it slide. As I walked towards my home, I could hear laughter and splashing coming from the backyard. My mind was racing, and I couldn't imagine what I was about to walk into. I came around the corner and saw 5 adults sitting at my patio table and 3 kids splashing and playing in my pool. The adults were having a good time, drinking and eating, and even attempting to use my propane grill. When one woman asked if I had towels, I finally spoke up and asked them who they were and why they were on my property. The main woman, who I will refer to as TB, took off her sunglasses and looked at me with a smirk on her face. She said, "Who are you?" as her friends looked at me like I was interrupting their fun. "I'm the owner of this house," I replied. TB laughed and said, "Sweetheart, you must be confused. Your Airbnb is probably next door." Her friends chimed in, telling me to leave them alone and congratulating her on her new house. It was clear that TB had lied to her friends, claiming my home as her own. She even joked that her ex-husband paid for the house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was lying to her friends, and they believed her. I knew I had to do something about it, but I didn't want to escalate the situation. So I decided to pretend that I was mistaken and walked away. But as soon as they were out of sight, I locked the gate from the outside, trapping them inside my property. I then called a towing company and had their cars removed from the front of my house. When the police arrived, TB was frantically trying to climb over the gate to escape. It was a sight to see, and even the police officers couldn't help but chuckle at her foolishness. They arrested her for trespassing and disorderly conduct. After the incident, TB tried to make amends, but I wanted nothing to do with her. I decided to press charges, and she was fined for her actions. I also made it clear to her that if she ever set foot on my property again, she would be in big trouble. Months passed, and things went back to normal. TB kept her distance, and I was able to enjoy my home without any unwanted guests. However, I began to notice a pattern. TB would drive by my house slowly, and I couldn't believe that TB was still lurking around my home. It was as if she couldn't let go of her obsession with my property. I started to feel uneasy and decided to take some precautions. I installed a security camera system and made sure to always lock my gate. But one day I received a call from my neighbor. She told me that TB had been talking about me again, claiming that my home was hers and that I had stolen it from her. My neighbor tried to reason with her, but TB wouldn't listen. I knew I had to do something about this. I contacted a lawyer and decided to take legal action against TB. The lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter warning her to stop making false claims about my home, but TB wouldn't back down. It all came to a head one afternoon when I came home to find TB on my property again. This time she had brought a group of people with her and they were trying to break into my home. I was terrified and called the police immediately. The police arrived quickly and arrested TB and her accomplices. It turned out that TB had convinced these people to help her take over my home. She had even provided them with fake documents to prove that the home was hers. I was in shock. How could someone be so obsessed with a property that didn't belong to them? TB was charged with multiple offenses, including fraud and trespassing. She was sentenced to jail time and had to pay me compensation for the damages caused to my home. After that incident, I never heard from TB again. I sold my home and moved to a new location where I could live without any worries. It was a tough lesson to learn, but I realized that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself and protect what is rightfully yours. In my opinion, this story was both entertaining and a bit alarming. It's hard to imagine someone being so obsessed with a property that they would go to such great lengths to try and claim it as their own. However, I do commend the homeowner for standing up for themselves and taking legal action against the neighbor. It's important to protect what is rightfully yours, and I think this story serves as a reminder to always be vigilant and aware of your surroundings. Overall, it was a thrilling read and definitely kept me on the edge of my seat. The next story is titled, "Accidentally Burned Down My Neighbor's Fence and Got Sued for $10K, but Justice Was Served." I was living in a small town in the countryside, working as a mechanic at a local car repair shop. I had always been fascinated by fireworks and had grown up using them with my family during 4th of July celebrations. However, my fascination turned into a nightmare when I accidentally burned down my neighbor's fence and caused extensive damage to her yard. It all happened on a warm summer evening. I had just gotten off work and was looking forward to a relaxing evening at home. My neighbor had gone out of town for the weekend and had asked me to keep an eye on her house while she was away. I decided to invite a few friends over for a small barbecue in her backyard. We had brought some fireworks with us to light up later in the evening. As the sun started to set, we lit up some sparklers and watched as they illuminated the sky. It was a beautiful sight. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse when one of my friends accidentally lit a bottle rocket that flew over the fence and landed in my neighbor's backyard. We heard a loud bang and saw the fire spreading rapidly. We quickly realized what had happened and tried to put out the fire with a garden hose. But it was no use. The fire was spreading too fast. I called the fire department and they arrived in a matter of minutes. They were able to put out the fire before it caused any further damage to neighboring houses. However, my neighbor's fence had been completely destroyed, and her yard was now a charred mess. I was devastated by what had happened and knew that I had to take responsibility for my actions. The next morning, I went over to my neighbor's house to apologize and see if there was anything I could do to help. She was understandably upset and demanded that I pay her $10,000 to cover the cost of the damages. I was taken aback by her demand and didn't know how to respond. I knew that I couldn't afford to pay her that much money and started to panic. I decided to seek legal advice and hired a lawyer who specialized in property damage cases. He advised me to get an estimate for the damage and to negotiate with my neighbor. I followed his advice and got an estimate from a reputable contractor. The estimate came out to be $3,500, which was still a lot of money, but a lot less than what my neighbor was asking for. I presented her with the estimate and offered to pay her that amount. She refused and threatened to take me to court. After a few weeks, I received a notice from the court that my neighbor had filed a lawsuit against me for $10,000. I was devastated and didn't know what to do. I went back to my lawyer, who assured me that we had a strong case. He advised me to gather any evidence that could help my case, such as photos of the damage, the estimate, and any communication with my neighbor. On the day of the court hearing, my neighbor was confident that she would win the case. She had brought her own lawyer and a pile of documents to support her claim. However, as soon as the judge saw the evidence that we had gathered, he was not impressed with her claim. He asked her why she was asking for such a high amount and whether she had any proof to support her claim. She stuttered and fumbled for words, but couldn't provide any convincing evidence. The judge then turned to me and asked me to present my case. I calmly presented my evidence and explained my side of the story. After hearing both sides, the judge took a few minutes to deliberate. When he returned, he made a dramatic announcement. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to say this, but you are out of line. The evidence presented by the defendant shows that he is only responsible for the cost of the fence, which is $1,200. And considering the fact that the plaintiff's yard was in poor condition even before the fire, there is no justification for the additional $8,800 that you are asking for." My neighbor was shocked by the verdict and started to argue with the judge. However, the judge was firm in his decision and ordered her to pay my legal fees. I felt relieved and grateful that justice had been served. I didn't want to ruin my relationship with my neighbor, but her actions had left a bitter taste in my mouth. I decided to keep my distance from her and move on with my life. Months went by, and I had almost forgotten about the incident. However, one day I received a call from my lawyer. He told me that my neighbor had filed another lawsuit against me for defamation. She claimed that I had spread false rumors about her on social media and had caused her emotional distress. I was shocked by her accusations and knew that they were baseless. I had never spoken ill of her to anyone, let alone on social media. My lawyer advised me to gather any evidence that could prove my innocence. I spent hours combing through my social media accounts and found nothing that could support her claims. I even reached out to my friends and family members to see if they had heard anything about me spreading rumors. They all denied having any knowledge of such rumors. The day of the court hearing arrived, and my neighbor was once again confident that she would win the case. She had brought her own lawyer and a stack of papers to support her claim. However, this time I was ready for her. I had brought all the evidence that I had gathered, including screenshots of my social media accounts and witness statements. When the judge asked her to present her evidence, she struggled to come up with anything substantial. She stuttered and fumbled, trying to make her case. However, it was evident that she had no proof to support her claims. I presented my evidence and explained that I had never spoken ill of her to anyone, let alone on social media. After hearing both sides, the judge took a few minutes to deliberate. When he returned, he made another dramatic announcement. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to say this, but your claims are baseless. The evidence presented by the defendant shows that he has never spoken ill of you on social media or otherwise. You have wasted the court's time and resources by filing this frivolous lawsuit. I hereby order you to pay the defendant's legal fees and to refrain from filing any further lawsuits against him." My neighbor was once again shocked by the verdict and stormed out of the courtroom. I felt relieved and grateful that justice had been served once again. I realized that I had learned a valuable lesson from this incident. I had to be careful with the fireworks and take responsibility for my actions. I also learned that I had to stand up for myself and fight for what was right. In the end, my neighbor moved away from the town and I never saw her again. I learned that forgiveness is key to moving on, and that holding grudges only leads to more pain and suffering. I am grateful for the support of my friends and family during this difficult time and for the justice that was served. In my opinion, this story was a roller coaster ride of emotions. I couldn't believe the nerve of the neighbor trying to milk the defendant for such a large sum of money. It was satisfying to see the judge put her in her place and rule in favor of the defendant. The twist ending with the second lawsuit was unexpected, but it was great to see the defendant stand up for himself and prove his innocence. Overall, it was a well-written story that kept me engaged from beginning to end. The last story is titled, Revenge at the Wedding. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had finally found the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I was ready to make that commitment. However, my younger brother Todd had other plans. Todd had always been the favorite child in our family. He was born with complications and had to stay in the ICU for a month, so my parents doted on him and gave him everything he wanted. As a result, he grew up thinking the world revolved around him. He always made himself the center of attention at family events and never cared about anyone else's feelings. When I proposed to my girlfriend Michelle, I wanted to elope, but she insisted that we have a small wedding and invite our families. I agreed, even though I knew that Todd might ruin the day. Sure enough, during Michelle's father-daughter dance, Todd proposed to his girlfriend Lucy. It was a selfish move that ruined the moment for Michelle and her father, and I knew I had to do something to get back at Todd. After the wedding, I talked to my best man Jim, and we came up with a plan. We hired a woman to pretend to be Todd's side piece. She cornered Todd and Lucy at a restaurant and claimed that she was pregnant with his baby. Todd denied it, but the woman had his phone number, and I had messed with his phone to incriminate him. Lucy threw the ring back at Todd and left in tears. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I had gotten back at Todd, but I also felt guilty for what I had done. I had stooped to his level, and I wasn't proud of it. However, I couldn't bring myself to apologize to Todd, even though he was my brother. A few months after the wedding, Todd and Lucy broke up. It turned out that Todd had cheated on her with multiple women, and Lucy couldn't forgive him. Todd blamed me for their breakup and refused to speak to me or Michelle. My parents tried to mediate, but they were also upset with me for ruining Todd's proposal. I regretted what I had done, but I also knew that Todd had brought it upon himself. He had always put himself first and never cared about anyone else's feelings. I had finally stood up to him, and I had no regrets. Update. A few years later, I received a call from Todd's ex-girlfriend, Lucy. She had met someone new and was getting married. She wanted me to be her wedding planner. At first, I was hesitant to take the job, but Lucy assured me that Todd wouldn't be there, and it would be a fresh start for all of us. I agreed to be her wedding planner, and I worked hard to make her wedding day perfect. When the day finally arrived, everything went smoothly, and Lucy was happy. However, as I was packing up my things, I saw Todd walk into the venue. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Todd looked at me with anger in his eyes, and I knew that he was there to confront me. I tried to avoid him, but he cornered me and started yelling at me. He blamed me for ruining his life and causing him to lose Lucy. I tried to explain that it was his own fault, but he wouldn't listen. The argument escalated, and before I knew it, Todd had punched me in the face. I fell to the ground and he continued to kick me. It took several people to pull him off me, and by the time they did, I was bleeding and bruised. I filed a police report and pressed charges against Todd. He was arrested and charged with assault. It was a shock to our family, but at the same time it was a relief to know that he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. During the trial, Todd pleaded guilty and was sentenced to community service and anger management classes. He apologized to me and Lucy, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. Our relationship was forever strained, and I knew that it would never be the same again. After the trial, I received a call from my parents. They apologized for not seeing things from my perspective and for always favoring Todd. They realized that they had enabled his behavior and that it was time for him to take responsibility for his actions. It was a small victory, but it meant a lot to me. As for me and Michelle, we continued to live our lives and build a future together. We learned from our experiences and made sure to always communicate and work through our problems together. We had our ups and downs, but we never lost sight of what was important, our love for each other. Looking back on it now, I realized that revenge was not the answer. It only caused more pain and hurt for everyone involved. I regret what I did to Todd and Lucy, but I also know that it was a learning experience. I learned that sometimes it's better to let go of the past and focus on the present and the future. Life is too short to hold grudges and seek revenge. Instead, we should focus on forgiveness, understanding, and love. In my opinion, Revenge at the Wedding is a compelling story that shows how family dynamics and unresolved issues can lead to dramatic consequences. While seeking revenge may seem satisfying in the moment, it often only leads to more hurt and pain. I think it's important to communicate with our loved ones and work through our problems together, rather than resorting to drastic measures. Overall, the story is a good reminder to prioritize forgiveness, understanding, and love in our relationships. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.